Hello everybody, Giselle Grenier here from artplace.ca. In today's video, I'm going to be creating something a little bit different for you guys. I'm going to be learning how to paint a winter tree in a kind of fun mixed media style. I guess I could call it really creative. And basically, I've been getting some emails from people, wanting to learn how to paint landscapes. That was my original training was wildlife and landscape painting, and I haven't done a landscape painting in forever. I remember back quite a few years, Joe and my son Harrison, before he went into the military, would come out with me to all the conservation areas and would film me painting, and that's when my business was art by nature. Anyways, so I'm going to basically going to go over a very simple winter tree. It's a little winter scene, but we're going to use some fun textures in there just to create something very different. Not going to be a flat, boring painting. It's going to be something different. So I've got some different pieces here, and although you can create this on watercolor paper, mixed media, whatever you want, I want to focus this time on these types of things. Canvases. This is a gallery style wrapped canvas, so you can just hang it straight on the wall. And this is I like painting a whole bunch of these to give me inspiration, as I can usually see something developing here and go from there. These little wood panels, same thing, you just paint them and hang them on the wall. They don't need to be framed. And then of course your typical framed piece. Joe made these frames for me. Got some frosted UV protected plexiglass in there, and it's just masonite, so you can paint on that and it goes right in here. And using a UV protected plexiglass behind or in front of your paintings are really good if they're going to be in direct sunlight. Okay, so for this project I'm going to use this and this little wood panel. I did no wrong. So this is a little birch panel, nice little framed, and if you or a spouse or a friend or a hubby are nifty in the workshop, these are super easy to make. You can use if you go to Lowe's, I know at Lowe's in the trim section you can get all these different types of trims for edges. You can make frames, and that's what Joe did with this one here. He made a whole bunch. This is actual trim for the wall. And it's, how many pieces is this? This is 2 pieces. So this is the actual trim here. It's like a quarter round that's been beveled, and then just the flat wood piece. But either way, you don't have to do anything that fancy, but just paint on masonite. Now these things, when I bought them, had these stupid stickers on them. They don't come off. It doesn't matter. Goo gone. It doesn't come off. So I'm going to paint right over it. First thing I want to do, because this is raw wood, I want to prep it. You can seal it if you want. I'm just going to use plain old gesso. And I'm using the DecoArt media line for this. I've never done an actual traditional painting using the media line for what I'm doing here. I thought this is going to be fun. We're just going to have some fun with this. So I'm putting some gesso on there, and gesso prepares the surface substrate for what you want to work on. Using my number 8 bristle brush, and I'm using that because I want more texture. Texture is something that gives your painting real interest, and they don't look flat. Especially when you're working with a landscape, it's all about texture. And you can use this as thick as you want. You can palette knife apply it. And I'm going to go right over this. And this one here will take about, now you're supposed to actually let gesso cure for 24 hours. So if you're doing this just to practice and learn, that's fine. You can start working on it as soon as it's dry. But if you want to create it as a gift or something like a keepsake or something that's going to be around for a while, then it's always great to prepare these ahead of time so you don't have to wait. Because usually when you have to wait that long for something to dry during the creation process, especially the prep, you lose inspiration. And what's happening now is the grain of the wood is starting to come through a little bit. And what we can do is when this is dry, we can give it a light sanding. I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it just the way it is. Because I'm going to be using some additional texture on this, I don't want this to be smooth. Now, splinter-wise, that's something different. So when you're painting on wood, just make sure that it's free of splinters. So I'm going to look at my piece this way, and I'm going to take some more gesso, and now I'm just using the side of the brush because the gesso's already started to dry. Let's see if I can get you that glare. See in here where it's not so shiny? That's already dried. So I'm just going to take the brush and I'm just visualizing a little composition here with some snow. And I don't want to have all my lines going straight. I don't want to have them hard edges. And I like to try when I get to the edges to try to lift up a bit so the eye kind of goes back down. I love this shape right here. Okay, just something like this. Nothing fancy. Then at the top, where some of the wood is showing through, I'm just going to put a little bit more gesso in there. Because it's a sky, I want to create these with more horizontal strokes. Again, this is just a technique. You can do with it what you will. But if you've never done this before saying, "Ooh, I don't like this," try it. Because when you're trying something for the first time or trying something new, you'll always end up putting your own style and spin onto it. So let's see what happens. And if things go wrong, what does that tell you? You've learned something. Life is so much more fun, especially when there's mistakes being done, because you're learning something new. And because we're working with acrylics, what's the worst that can happen? You cover it up and start something else. It's not like an oil painting. Okay, there we go. And then same thing for the top. Now I'm just going to put a little bit more over where that label is. That's going to end up being, we won't be able to see that anyways. So have fun with this. It's, put some music on and put some music on. We're going to be painting color over this. You're going to learn a little bit of color mixing. Nothing too overwhelming though. And this is meant to be an actual lesson, so it's not going to be super short, but this design is super easy. Okay. And let's see if I can replicate this again. So as you're painting, sometimes you get these dry bits because you work with a dry brush. You can keep these aside, and you can put them back into your painting. These little dry bits of gesso. It just adds more texture. And when you can do a DIY texture, that's just something you don't have to buy. And you already know it works with it's compatible because it's the actual product. All right, so I'm going to close this and we're going to let this dry. I'm going to let this dry until it's ready. But just to be safe, I'm going to let it dry for a good 3 hours, only because it is super cold outside, and I don't like my studio to be too hot because of the studio lights. So if you're in a warm, dry environment, this is going to dry really, really fast. If you're in a cool, dry environment, this is going to take a little bit longer to dry. If you're in a hot, humid environment, forget it. You're going to be waiting forever. So prepare everything in advance. All right, we'll be back in a bit. We're all dry, and I'm going to use Cobalt Teal Hue. Put a good amount in there, and then we're going to paint the entire panel. And because we used that brush for the gesso, we got lots of texture. Now I did wet the brush and I added some water to the paint because I wanted the paint to go into all the nooks and crannies. you put it on too thick, it may not set inside. There's no steadfast rule on that, but just be aware. Oh, and especially with this pigment, because it's transparent, make sure that your paint water doesn't have any dirty color in it from white paint. Otherwise, the blue will become opaque. And you can leave it with the one coat or put 2 coats on there. Completely up to you. I'm going to get rid of any drips. Now, usually I don't like showing the drying process with the heat gun because it's noisy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I would dry something like this and then touch it up as I go. So holding it in one hand, and basically, you know, whether there's paint on the table or not, doesn't matter. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put the heat gun over this and I'm going to turn it. And I've got my hand like this around the panel, and I'm just going to turn and turn and turn. And if I see something, then I'll just pick it up with my finger and go and go and go. Because once this is dry, it's permanent. So just go around. And you'll be able to see it dry as the shine disappears. And if you had done this on just the raw untreated wood, ungessoed wood, the paint would actually sink into the wood, making it much longer to dry. There we go. So you can see I have a much lighter area here. So I'm just going to go over. And I don't want this to have what I call an opaque finish, meaning a solid finish of color. A bit more water. I think I'll need to get a bit more paint on there. And when you're painting, once your paint gets tacky, you got to stop and let it dry. Otherwise, you're going to lift up the layer of paint. Just take it with a heat gun or a hair dryer and you'll be fine. And I want the bottom to be fully covered. And I've got some little ridges of paint here. I'm not going to worry about it, and you'll see why in the next step. I can take I can try with a baby wipe. Then I can come in and this doing this probably isn't even going to apply in the next step. You'll see why. But you can put in some clouds. I'm showing you this in case you don't have the product I'm going to use in the next step. So you can just remove a little bit of the paint to create some clouds. Like that. Okay. And we've got, you can still see the texture line from where the snowdrift is going to be. All right. So I'm going to dry this with the heat gun. Alright, so this is nice and dry, and this is where we're going to start playing with some crackling products. So what I want to do is I want to use a Crackle paint on top, and then I'm going to use a Crackle paste on the bottom. It's going to create some interesting textures and with the cracks, and you can antique it or whatever you want. But for this purpose, it's just to add some contrast. Now with these Crackle products, you want to apply it and not overwork it, because the minute the Crackle paint, especially because it's a much thinner one, it starts to activate fairly quickly. So if you keep overworking it, you're not going to be able to, you're not going to get any cracks. So I'm just going to apply this way. Try to avoid hard edges. When I mean hard edges is like that. This is why I wasn't worried about ridges of paint. You can even take it to the side if you want. This actually might look really nice. Just like that. Keep it nice and rough. Do you know how long it's taken for me to master holding my panel like that? Actually, ah! The top I'm going to put a bit more. That's where that label was. You'll be able to see what it looks like with like thick applications. And I want to get some right like that. I don't want to leave any little spots of like little itty bitty holes of color. Okay. So that's the Crackle paint, and get rid of the excess, put that in water. Now I'm going to use Crackle Paste. That's much thicker. And with this one here, I like it with the palette knife, and then you can choose large coverage and then a smaller coverage and much more detailed coverage. Very thick. And the DecoArt products are interchangeable, so I'm going to bring that right over the edge. You can sand it too. No, I'm not a left-handed painter. And let the panel pick up the material, the Crackle paste. Oh, that's a nice thick piece there. And this is just going to simulate a snowdrift. Like that. Okay? Put that in water. You got to make sure that stuff goes in water right away. And let's see if I can move my head around to see if it's starting to crack. And this you can't heat set. You got to let this dry naturally. And this I'm going to let this sit for a couple of hours. And is it starting to crack? Yeah, it's starting to crack right here. Let me see if I can get a close-up for you. Here's a really good close-up. You can start seeing the cracks happening. And this is just after a minute. So I'll let this sit, and then when we come back, we'll have everything cracked, and then we'll start painting our tree. So it didn't take that long to dry, actually. It only took about an hour and a half to dry. And I want to show you all the cracks here. Really nice. Hopefully the camera's picking everything up. That's really nice. So it's pretty permanent in there. Where you run into some issues, if there's pieces that are really sticking up high, this is actually okay. It may chip off. So if you've got pieces that have like a ridge that's pointing up this way, either sand it off or give it a coat of varnish. And this is actually pretty good. I'm going to take some fine sandpaper, and I'm just going to remove any heavy bumps on the edges there. I'd rather do it now than when the painting is finished. I'm saying that there's no reason why you can't do it when the painting's done, because the painting's going to be here. I don't want to take too much off. Totally sandable. That's what I love about this. There we go. So what you want to do when you've done a heavy sanding, either take a damp cloth or a tack cloth and just, wipe everything off. Don't blow the dust in the air. You'll end up inhaling it. Okay, so for our tree, so I got a tinted graphite pencil. And I'm not doing this with paint because if you're learning to, if you're interested in learning how to paint trees, when you're starting out, you're going to make mistakes. Okay, you're not going to draw or paint a tree perfect the first time. And you know what? And that's okay. Van Gogh made mistakes when he started. Like, nobody's perfect. And so with a tinted graphite pencil, and this is water soluble, it's a Durant Graphite tint, you can use whatever you have. Okay, regular graphite works as well, but with all this texture, it's going to be harder to erase. With this, you just wet it and wipe it off. So what I'd like to do is, and this will be a center composition, and start about maybe about a quarter of the way down, and draw a relatively straight line all the way down to wherever your ridge for the snow starts. And by using this tinted graphite pencil, it will be water soluble, so this will also make the tree trunk stand out. I'm going to press a little bit harder. I'm going to make this darker than it should be just so you can see it for camera purposes. When trees are not, in my world, trees aren't like this. Not my style of tree for this particular painting. I'm looking for a tree that's got some really good space in between, and that's called negative space. So negative space is all the space around the elements. So I've got tons of lessons on what I'm covering in much more detail in the membership site, and you can get a link to that on artplace.ca. But very quickly, what I like to do is just come out with a rough shape, and I like to do one side first and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then turn it upside down, and because my hand is almost covering this, and I'm not even looking here, but I'm doing the same thing. I'll start up here, and the reason why I'm turning it upside down is by nature our brains try to make everything perfect. If we were to draw something like this, our mind will try to mimic the same thing again. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is that it will help teach you to not make things perfect, to make it more interesting. Okay, so it gets a little bit bigger as we get down to the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to retrace this much darker. Where's my lines? I'm going to tilt this a bit. This one line didn't even show up. And then this one. And it's a little bit more of a challenge on top of this crackle paste, or crackle paint, like that. Okay, so you can see there's lots of stuff happening around. They're not all, other than here, the pencil didn't quite go around. You'll see with the paint, when I put the paint on, there's all these interesting things around here. And then when you go out in nature, if you see these triangle shaped trees, they're boring. There's nothing to them. I like to see trees that have all this beautiful space inside. That way you can see through them, and you don't have to cover every single part of the paint. We're going to have some nice pockets of the sky showing through. So to do that, I'm going to do a little bit of color mixing. So I'm going to be using phthalo green on the yellow side. And I'm going to put out, you don't need a lot. This phthalo colors, super powerful. And because it's so super powerful, let's knock it down with some burnt sienna, an equal amount. This is a core color, core pigment in my palette. You should have burnt sienna for sure in everything. And we can work with a round brush, we can work with a flat brush, it doesn't really matter. Now let's try it with a little flat brush. I'm using, what is this? This is a number 6 shader. I'm going to wet the brush, and I'm just going to pull out, make a loading zone, roughly equal parts. Wipe the excess off on the paintbrush, off on a cloth I should say, and I'm just going to get this started. And I'm just going to start filling that in. You see how I'm doing this little padding stroke? Because I'm getting all these interesting little things happening. And keeping it light, very light on the paint. I'm not using physically a lot of paint. This side is going to be a bit more challenging because of all the texture product in there. Okay. And I'll be doing a couple of different styles, other projects using maybe like a round brush, and I know I want to cover off this project using the DecoArt Home Decor, the chalky finish colors. A bit more green, and as I'm reloading the brush, I'm picking up either a bit more burnt sienna or a bit more green because it creates a variety with the colors. And everybody's got their own way of doing trees. So if you're already experienced with painting the trees, then use whatever method works for you. Okay. Then once we get basically that filled in, now we can start making some little adjustments. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more green, and I'm just going to make a few little adjustments as I go. I want to get more of this air. This is perfect up here. And here I kind of lost my way, and because everything is so thick. So everything can be fixed. Make these a little bit longer. Push up a little bit to get a fluffier branch in there. Yeah, here is really heavy with product, and there's no way I'm going to be able to fill in everything, which is fine. You can see how bright green that is. I need to put a little bit more burnt sienna in there. Also pick the side that's going to be shadowed. I'm going to pick this side to be shadowed, which means it's typically going to be the darker side. So by adding another layer of color, it's automatically going to be a little bit darker. And just take some burnt sienna, and I'm just going to fill that in right in here. And we're going to shape that with snow as well. Let's bring that right like that. Whoops, too much brown. So just pity pad. And just very, very slowly work on this. Too much green, make it a little bit darker. So the more burnt sienna you add, the darker it gets on the one side, and we're going to be adding a little bit of yellow on this side, which will make it a little bit brighter. So I'm going to just bring that to the top a little bit more. And now with the corner of the brush, I'm just going to push, a little bit wider. Like that. You don't want it to be so detailed at the top because it's so small. A bit more brown in here. And then you can just take the corner of the brush and right at the very end just push out a little bit, which will create very, very thin coating of paint to make it look like the branches are very, very diffused. You don't want to go for solid color at this point. It's a little bit harder on the brush. You can also do this with a bristle brush, but if you're learning how to paint trees, it's probably unlikely you may have bristle brushes at this point. If you do, then you can try and experiment. There we go. So you see how the nice negative space is in there? And if by chance you made your tree a triangle tree, you can fill it, pop some blue back in there, and you can work with that. Okay. Now we're going to take some Hansa Yellow Medium. And let me go to a different brush. I'm going to go to my little round brush. This is the 3-0 round, tiny little brush. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to put some of this color on first to see how it goes on. And it's pretty transparent. You can barely see it. I'm going to tilt this a little bit. So I'm just going to put this on the very edges, but I don't want to, I don't want to paint that side yellow because it'll look funny. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick the parts that are sticking out, and you're just going to add a little bit of yellow. Some will go a little bit to the center, some will only be at the tips. And just to start building in some highlights. Now, I'm also going to be trying an experiment with this. I'll be doing it in probably in my art journal. Painting a tree like this using art bars, which is a wax water soluble stick. So that's going to be interesting. And I want to call out a challenge to one of my friends in my Facebook group, Suzette. I would love to see her paint a tree like this on one of her backgrounds. She does some really beautiful backgrounds. I told her I was going to call on her as a surprise. You see how I'm just starting to build that up? Well, in reality, when you have a tree that the sun's coming from this way, this side's going to be shadowed. The tree is round, so I'm going to have some little parts here, the very tips, that just a few of them, where are almost the ones sitting in the back, they're just going to have a little bit of light, not too much. You can also, if you want, substitute the yellow for white to make it look like snow. But I'm going to have another project for that. So just a little bit, not too much. And if you happen to add too much yellow, what do we do to fix it? Add more green. That's why I left the green here. And if you're painting a tree that's more on the blue side, you can take phthalo green that's on the blue side, or take a little bit of phthalo green and mix a little bit of phthalo blue in it. Just take a little bit of the green. Very, very intense. You have to knock it back with some burnt sienna. Add a little bit of yellow. Bit more yellow. I don't want it to stand out too much. And don't forget, acrylics dry darker. Traditional acrylics. There are some acrylics out there that dry, how you see them wet is how they dry. And these ones here, when the water evaporates, they dry a little bit darker. A little bit of burnt sienna. And just some spots here, which is where the tree trunk would naturally show through. The tree trunk actually could be done even in burnt umber if you wanted to. And take a little bit of the green, more of the brown, just at the bottom. You can even just touch in a little bit of burnt sienna, make little sticks, which is the branches. Okay, so I think that's actually pretty good. And then you can just hit it with a little bit of extra light in the front. Remember, the tree's not flat, it's round. So although the sun is coming from here, there is indirect light hitting it in the front. And this yellow, I'm just touching in the front to make it look like there's branches in the front. And if you happen to put too much paint, don't worry about it. And using this tiny brush for me, man, this is out of my comfort zone. I like using the biggest brush that I can stand using. Okay. There's lots of different techniques for doing trees. Just, I would say try them all and then stick to what you like. Here we go. Okay. And I'm going to take a little bit of green, a little bit more of this green here. Because you've got snow on the ground, it's also reflecting light, so your tree is not going to be black on this side. And whoops, too much green there. That's the wrong green, actually. There we go. And Hansa Yellow, because it's transparent, it's going to show through all these layers, which is going to be really nice. I want to detail that a bit better. There we are. Okay, so that's pretty good. And now for this part here. So I'm going to get these paints out of the way. I don't want them. Make some room here. All right, so I'm going to take some ultramarine blue right here. And I'm going to take, let's see. I'm going to take a little bit larger brush. This is a number 10 shader. A little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of blue. Now for those of you following me, do you know what color I'm making here? Burnt sienna and blue, equal parts. Chromatic black. I don't want black, but snow relatively being more on the blue side, what I'm trying to do is create more of a Payne's gray. Wipe that off, and I'm just underneath where the cobalt, the bright blue is, and I'm just going to put a glazing layer right over this. Actually use the bristle brush for this probably. You can leave that as white if you want, but what I'm doing, and I actually could have tinted this as well. I know it looks funny now. It'll make sense in a minute. I'll take a bit more. A little bit of water. And the water is sinking, this thin paint is sinking inside the cracks. Just making sure I've got all the blue, and you know what, the blue doesn't have to be perfect, okay? Now a baby wipe. Oh, come on. I just filled up the package and now it's tearing. So what I'm going to do is just squeeze out the excess water. Could have also done this with the antiquing medium. And now I'm just going to take the baby wipe and just over the snow part, just going to gently wipe this back. But you're not going over the panel part, just on the crackling part. But on the left side, don't wipe out so much. Well, I've got one piece of crackle sticking up and it nicked the baby wipe. I actually want to make that a little bit more blue, so I'm going to take out a little bit more. And I'm going to take, actually I'm going to take a round brush. Let's see if I can do it with this. The existing mixture. That's better. A little bit more of the ultramarine blue, which will reflect the sky. Much nicer. And the paint is sinking inside the cracks, which just makes it look really interesting. You're not going to lose it. And I think what I'm going to leave it like that because I'm going to take some translucent white and just skim over this. Just going to blot the brush. And I'm going to let this dry. I'm not going to do this side. Just the top ridges. It's just grabbing the paint. Now I'm going to take a heat gun to this. I'm going to quickly dry that. Take a bit more paint. Just make sure I get rid of all that. You know when you're outside and the snow seems to glisten? Wouldn't that be nice if we can put that in here? Let's do that. I got some Glamour Dust, which is a powder. It's a very, very micro thin powder. So I'm just going to lay only on the one side because it would look like the snow is glistening. You can also use gesso if you want. Just a little bit. And the tree may not be shading this part here. And you can also, if you have like a glitter paint, you can use that as well. I'm actually going to use this Glamour Dust when I start splashing some snowflakes on here. There we go. And you got to make sure that when you're actually finished your painting session that you wash the brush really, really well. And I want to do one more thing. Where's my gesso? I'm going to take some gesso. I'm going to turn that around. And I just want to put a little bit of white right in here. So the snow is actually nuzzling up against the tree trunk. And you can take this opportunity too to, you know, if you've got some areas that you don't like, don't piddle with this stage though. So now it just looks like the snow is actually nuzzled against the tree where the trunk just wasn't placed on top. There you go. If you want, you can even put some snow on top of the tree. I'm not going to do that because the next step is a lot more fun. I'm going to leave that there just in case. English Red Oxide. Just a speck. That's already too much. And I'll take some more translucent white. And a little bit of Glamour Dust in each one. Let's see. This brush might be, well, you know what? Let's try it. I'm going to wet the brush. And what I want to do now is just splatter. Now, if you're not sure if you're going to like this part here, give your painting a coating of varnish or let's say decoupage medium or matte medium to create a barrier layer. That way when you do whatever you want, if you don't like it, you can always wipe it back. And so I wet the brush, wet the paint, which has the glitter. Is that going to be enough glitter? May not be enough. And all we're doing now is just adding some really funky colors. So what we're going to be doing is this. And I just got it all over me. Oh, and I got it on my microphone. So yeah, And you're saying, in what world is your snow red? It doesn't matter whether it's red. We're adding interest. You do the same thing with the white, the translucent white. And it's not so much I'm worried about here, so I want to make sure I get some on the tree. This part here won't, come on. There we go. There we are. How cool is that? You can even do it with a little bit of yellow if you wanted to. I don't see why you can't. We all know what happens when you have yellow snow, right? Just little bits. And that's it. So now let me just put this aside for a sec. Let me clean up the table. So with this particular project, you learned basically, you learned about priming a panel, why you need to prime it. You learned about applying a gallery style panel that you just hang up. You learned about applying the Crackle Paste. You learned about Crackle Medium. You learned about, sketching a tree. You learned about negative space. You learned about shading and highlighting depending on the direction of the sun. You learned about shading and highlighting when it comes to snow, and you threw in some colors, contrasting colors to push the perfection that snow is not red and snow is not yellow. Okay, snow's supposed to be white, but it's just to push you out of that comfort zone. And I love this. This is beautiful. So what can you do with this? Hang it up. Sign it and hang it up. Think of this project as well as being flexible enough that you can do it on, let's say, watercolor paper, and then you just tear the edges and you can mount it onto a greeting card. You can create a postcard. You can create an ATC. You can create this on a larger scale, smaller scale. You can do all these different things with this technique. The only suggestion I have for you, if you're going to use Crackle Paste and Crackle Paste and Crackle Paint, that you don't work on anything too thin, because the paper will really warp and it'll be hard to hold it flat. So if you're going to be using Crackle Paste, make sure that if you're using paper, it's at least 300 pounds is good. 140 pounds is okay. Just the thicker the paste, the more it's going to curl. Smaller pieces won't curl as much, but if you're using large sheets of paper, it will curl because that concentrated area is going to just bind the paper together. So there we go. Love this. Absolutely love this. And that's it. So I hope that you enjoy this. I really hope that you give it a try. And I would love it if you would share a picture with me. You can either email it to me or post it in our private Facebook group. Links to both of those are at artplace.ca. Now, don't forget, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. Comment below what you thought about the project, and if have you used any of these mediums before? Comment below and give me a thumbs up if you found this video useful and entertaining. It helps me create better videos, what you want to see. Alrighty, I will leave you with this. I'm going to go clean up. The only thing left I have to do with this, I'm going to let it dry for a day, and I will give it a coat of varnish just to give it extra protection, especially if you're going to be hanging this in an area of your home that's prone to humidity, such as the kitchen or your bathroom. So make sure you varnish the whole thing just to protect it. All right, you guys, until I see you in my next video, stay inspired.